into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, no, no. Not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
It goes to that whole thing of like they have all these rules for how you treat comics, but it depends on what you define to be a comic.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like you might decide these are the rules in this situation for Jimmy, let's say, but are you going to feel that way about Jake or about, like...
Yeah. I've been trying to figure out what it is, and I think it's like if they have to do comic versus comic, then it's like who's the more powerful comic or something, or like who's considered to be like the big shot or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
Because it's funny because it always reminds me of Planet of the Apes when they're like, monkey, no, kill monkey.
Yeah.
It's like such a dumb rule.
Yeah.
Anyways, hello everyone, and welcome to Pod Damn America, the Gothic Socialist podcast. It's being talked about all over compound media, subreddits, and forums. The bane of subreddit, Pod Damn America, or subreddits. I'm Jake Flores, and today I've got another edition of our comedy bullshit episodes that we like to do with our best friend in the biz, Luisa Diez. Welcome.
Hi, Jake. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for coming on back. I thought you said having my back, and I was like, thank you, too, because we're...
Because I keep showing up? Yes.
You're the only one who hasn't abandoned me and thrown me
I have
to the Come Down subreddit.
I have no sense of self-preservation when it comes to a career in comedy.
Me neither. Today, I wanted to talk to you about a couple of things. I threw together kind of an abstract show, and both of these things have been out for a minute, and so, like, you might, if you're listening, ask, well, why the fuck talk about this now? I don't know. The first one is the Aziz Ansari special that just came out. It's called Right Now. It's on Netflix. I think Twitter kind of had its day with it, and then it kind of just went away. It's just sort of rolled back into the dredges of Netflix. Nothing really happened.
Right.
The other one is the movie Midsommar, the Ari Aster horror film, which I've talked about a little bit on the podcast. When it first came out, I didn't want to spoil it. But I feel like now, it's been out long enough to where everyone knows the memes and shit. And I almost felt like the time passed to talk about this movie, which sucks because I thought we were the most on-brand podcast to talk about it because we're into horror and shit. But
over film podcasts, over everyone.
Well, I mean, just like our corner of the left podcast world. Everyone did a Midsommar episode this year because, obviously Hereditary was such a fucking hot movie last year that I think, everyone caught on.
Yeah.
This shit happens, with art that's really good and when it's in its, sophomore form. Everyone was really into Mitski last year for some reason. And I was like, what the fuck? I listened to this shit 10 years ago. Okay.
You're very cool.
I had that fucking annoying ego thing where I'm the only person supposed to know this. But anyway, Midsommar. Fucking everyone did a Midsommar episode against everyone with Connor Habib. Our friends Red Scare did a Midsommar episode.
Really?
The Horror Vanguard. Well, they do cultural critique, as you know.
Right.
That's what they do.
Yeah.
The Horror Vanguard, which makes sense because they're a horror socialist podcast. But a million. Obviously, Struggle Session. They also do cultural critique.
Right.
So there's not a lot of new ground to break. I do have some thoughts on this film, though, that I would like to get out anyway, and that I didn't hear on a lot of these other shows. But mainly, it crossed my mind when I was thinking about both of these things. I was biking around the other day that they have something in common in that. So Midsommar, if you just watched it and you kind of if you aren't familiar with the director, you might not have caught exactly what's going on because it is a little confusing. There's a little bit of a clunky film. It doesn't seem like it's quite executed the way it should be.
Okay.
And the themes are really weird, and I didn't really understand it until I read afterwards like why Ari Aster made it.
Oh, why did he make it?
He went through a breakup, and
Like got dumped or dumped?
he got dumped.
Okay.
I believe. And I think he felt really remorseful about it.
Okay.
And so he felt like a bad little boy, you know, and so he made a
Oh, I
movie
see.
where the main character is this guy who's not good to his girlfriend, and then the
and he
horror
gets
part of the
punished.
movie is that he gets fucking got, right?
Oh.
Yeah, and
Hearing that makes it worse to me now.
right?
Yeah. I like the movie less.
It's really weird because Midsommar is like, it's, you know, it's really, this guy clearly swings for the fences, everything he does. It's really ambitious. He's doing this thing, you know, horror in the light, like kind of the
Right.
bizarre, sort of like acid trippy horror, or
Yeah.
more like this movie's more about mushroom trips or whatever, but like that sort of thing. You know, it's not so much jump scares, and it's like imagery that's supposed to be like really moody and disturbing, which is like cool. That's very Kubrickian in my opinion. But the movie itself is funny because like Hereditary was, you know, lightning in a bottle. Like he somehow knocked it out of the park with this movie.
Okay.
And if you follow the way he makes movies, that he filmed like 8 hours of shit for Hereditary and then cut it down to like, what, 2.5 or whatever. And was able to carve this story out of it that was like kind of avant-garde, and like half of it was a drama and people were really confused about it, you know? And I think that he felt a little weird about like having that argument after that movie came out because it was kind of divisive. People were like, it's too much of a drama. I don't want to watch a Lifetime original movie, you know? I want to watch a horror movie. So he makes Midsommar very deliberately just to be like a folk horror, like a bunch of dumb kids go camping and then they get got by the monster sort of thing. But he does it in his style, which is very artsy and very dramatic. And the whole thing just is weird. And I imagine that he filmed like, or I think he did film like a lot of extra footage and then cut it back down to make this movie. But because he was sort of going for this cathartic thing where he worked his personal life into it, it ended up being like this badly executed, like kind of personal thing.
I see where we're going with the Aziz comparison.
Right.
Then.
Right.
Okay. Because for a minute there, I was a little worried. I was like, what are we talking about here? Because there's also this, you know, with movies, a lot of times, or mostly people talk about them as being like a product of the director's mind more than anything, or maybe the writer and the director, or especially if it's the same person who did both. But in the Aziz special, one of the things that stuck out to me was, and I think about it, I thought about it, I think we talked about it with Gerard and Drew Michael too, of like, at what point is it Aziz's vision and at what point is it Spike Jonze's vision?
Right.
And I literally went to Spike Jonze's Wikipedia to see like the other things he had directed, because I was like, I don't think this dude has directed stand-up before. So I like went to find it, and he's done a bunch of shit like commercials and music videos and movies and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But I couldn't find anything that was coming, so I just tweeted about it to ask, like, you know, whatever. And then a couple of people, a comic and a podcast festival producer, responded like, no, you know, and they gave me more information of other stuff he did, but no, he's never done stand-up. But then, you know, how much, I mean, obviously they work together, right? But then how much of, we'd have to think about this Ari Aster as kind of like a two-headed monster, right? Where like the personal story that's being interwoven is the Aziz part, and then like the way that it's being presented to us seems Spike Jonze-y.
Well, you know what? It kind of is like that, though, because, and this is like really like in the interviews he does, this is buried kind of and played down, but I don't think this was his original idea, this movie. It was pitched to him by somebody else after the success of Hereditary. Like, do you want to take this script?
Story,
And so then he did weird artistic shit with it where he like dumped his personal conflict into the fucking movie, right?
Okay.
So he is kind of like interacting with another person's work in a weird way. And I think that's why it was like kind of oddly I don't know. I mean, it was oddly executed. It was, you know, it was ambitious, and also like I don't think that it just like it didn't resonate, because sometimes when you create something and you make it too personal, then it doesn't do what art is supposed to do, where it's like, you know, it connects your personal thing with these like archetypes and common experiences. And so I don't know. I think he just kind of like it just kind of is all over the place. It's still like I found it like visually amazing, and I still can't stop thinking about it, and it's interesting. It was very imperfect to me though.
You know what's funny is like I think before we started recording, I told you like I'm so bad with movies and I fucking forget them as soon as I watch them. I probably multiple times a year I watch a whole movie like in an hour in. I'm like, wait a minute, I already seen this movie, and it's like almost over, and I'm like, well, I might as well see the rest. So I'm terrible. But when you first proposed that you wanted to talk about this combo, I was like, I couldn't like draw the connection, and I was like, I have no idea where Jake is going with this. But now you've like jogged my memory. And something else jumped out at me, which is, like, interestingly, when I saw Midsommar, what I thought it was about was this, like, weird critique of academia or academic anthropology.
Of course.
Yeah, so, I'm an anthropologist, so that's the fucking lens and frame that I'm seeing it through, and here's what I'm seeing, right? At least one of them was an anthropology student. Oh, no, two of them, right? Maybe not the third, but the black guy and the bad boyfriend, right?
The guys have that weird constructed conflict in the middle of it over their thesis or whatever. It's
so weird, but it wasn't just that, because it's so I had a hard time seeing as like the impetus for punishment being like you're a bad boyfriend or a bad person or whatever. It was actually that they were bad anthropologists because like, so to me, the plot of this movie was these graduate student anthropologists are about to have like the break before the year where they have to do their thesis. One of them is planning to take a trip with somebody else that he met to go see what idea he could get for his thesis. And his idea is that he's going to bring his friend and his roommate and his friend's girlfriend, right? So now it's like a spring break kind of like situation, but you're also going to study a culture, right? That's your idea. So that's extremely unethical. So you show up with your vacation team to like try to study this group. And then as soon as they do, the one that's not an anthropologist literally peed on their altar. Do you remember that?
On the elder tree.
Yeah. So there's like
you didn't know that? It's like a big dead tree.
No, I know. But this is what I mean. It's like it wasn't even like artfully like hinted at. It was like full, just like the worst version. So there's the guy that pees on everything, the hitting on the women inappropriately, like full just bad anthropological everything. The one that we are thinking at first, Chidi, right, from I forgot what he's called in
Christian, the main guy?
Christian, no, the black guy.
Oh, the black guy. I forgot his name.
I don't remember any of their names, to be honest
2 weeks ago.
I don't remember movies.
And
but
racism.
Yeah, exactly. So the guy that had the original idea to write the thesis, good description.
The fellow.
That fella.
Who.
Remember that he has the idea, right? And then he goes and like approaches an elder or like somebody to try to get permission to study them through like with their accepted, with their permission, right?
Yeah. And
when they say no, you can't look at the book, he fucking sneaks into their temple and like desecrates their shit by looking at it and taking photographs, and then he gets murdered like immediately after. And so I'm just being like, yes, you deserve that. Like watching this like horrific thing happening. And so I say this all to say, right, that the connection I see between that, the way that I saw Midsommar, and the Aziz thing is that weirdly, you know how they say like inside baseball is bad, right? You're not supposed to be like talking about shit that is so like insular to a particular group or community or industry that nobody else would get it, right?
Of course.
We do it all the time. Yeah. So Midsommar, in the way that I read it, it did have this weird like storyline and critique that only people in like academic social sciences would have picked up on, of like the unethical person who tries to steal your thesis and the egos involved in their, like it wasn't about pursuing science and getting to know these people. It was about them getting the best thesis, and being the first one to land this strange people and whatever. So that was like a weird inside baseball thing that I don't even know if it was on purpose by the original writer. And now that you told me it wasn't written by Ari Aster, I like suspect that it is purposeful, that whoever wrote it did have that purpose.
Yeah.
But I connect this to Aziz because, in comedy, it's like, I should say it used to be kind of an accepted belief that you shouldn't do comedy about comedy, right? Like, I don't know if comics agreed with that, but I would say industry did feel generally like comedy about comedy doesn't really work.
Yeah, well, it's unsellable.
It's unsellable, exactly. You're only playing to the back of the room. It's only like a reference to other comics.
It's also, in my opinion, fairly unartistic unless you just really lean into it and become like a commentary, like a comic.
There's exceptions. There's
like
exceptions. Yeah, exactly. There's
great.
exceptions who can hone it and make it a thing. But in general, like having a random bit in the middle of whatever else you do that is just about like how this joke doesn't work when I do it wherever, or like whatever, you know?
It's cringy.
It's cringy and it's weird. And so that's a vibe that I did get from the Aziz special, is that it was like self-referential to comedy in so many ways that, I mean, I don't know. Are we ready to talk about Aziz?
Let me do one more thing about Midsommar, and then I'm going to fucking go back into Aziz, because we need to really talk about the Aziz thing.
Yeah.
But the other thing that maybe connect these two things is exactly what you're describing with these college kids, right?
Okay.
These, like, grad students, rather. I think that something that was weird about Midsommar is that it couldn't decide what type of horror it wanted to be. It wanted to be kind of like lowbrow and highbrow at the same time. And because you had this cast of, like, goofball, like young kids that are obviously deliberately being sent to the slaughter, that is a trope from like Friday the 13th movies where they're slashers, where it's supposed to be fun that they get killed, but then it wanted to be this serious, disturbing thing, and that's why it's so weird. But in that, if you're going to follow the trope of, you know, these kids getting what is coming to them, there is kind of a parallel where, like, I think those horror movies probably should be coming back. They probably would play well in today's like cultural climate, because, you know, everyone is so anti like campus culture and shit. All the fucking triggered guys, like, you know, hate like people that are overly political and politically correct and all that stuff. And you see that a little bit in Aziz, right? Okay. And the other thing that happens in Midsommar is there's a trope they deliberately try to avoid, which is having the black guy die first. Oh, right. He technically doesn't, but the movie's like, it goes out of its way to do that and then falls back on its face, right?
But isn't his the first one we see?
It's the first one we see dies. Yeah. Which is like...
Still makes it the first one, kind of.
It's still basically...
we don't really know for sure that the other people are dead until the end.
What happens is the guy Joshua, I think his name is, he pisses in the tree.
The pisser? Okay.
And then one of the fucking women comes up to him and is like, I need to show you something in the woods.
He wants to act like she's going to fuck him.
He disappears. Yeah. Then when we see the black dude get killed and his head gets smashed with a hammer, camera goes up, and it looks like the dead guy killed him. What's actually happening is, according to Ari Aster, it's a cult member who's wearing the first guy's skin, which is a thing that like Vikings used to do, called necro pants, where you would like skin a person and then just like wear them as a suit. Look at my new pants or whatever. So he incorporated all this weird shit into it, and like honestly, when he interviews about it, he's like, "Yeah, part of it's comedy or whatever." Fucking whatever. Your movie didn't work. But anyways, I think that like type of horror kind of plays to some extent, because like the crowd I was in, or the audience, it's too much comedy, right? Yeah. The audience I was in when I watched Midsommar was like laughing at shit like that, and I was like, oh, this is like,
I do think it's funny.
This is market tested or something. Like this is. People do want to see college students die, you know?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I got to tell you, I did read it. I did see it as like, because of the way that I was reading it with the academics, or like the bad anthropology. Yeah. I laughed when they died, and I like was genuinely like, yes, kill that motherfucker. They're all bad. Even the girl, I was like, all of them, you should all die. And I was more disappointed that it wasn't more like slashery, and I guess I was less interested by the fancy, you know, like the aesthetics of it, and I wasn't that interested by any of that.
Well, here's my final kind of thesis on why these two things are together, right? I think both of these things, Midsommar and Aziz's right now, fail because they try to be all things at once, things that overlap with each other and cancel each other out. Okay. So Midsommar being like, you know, an art film and a lowbrow slasher and a, you know, cathartic thing all at the same time. And this Aziz special as being like, I feel like he contradicts himself a bunch of times.
He totally does, yeah.
Because he starts off this special by, like, we've talked about this before with like Louis C.K. thing, where like the worst thing that Louis C.K. did after he got Me Too'd is not talk about it. He avoided the subject. It sucks to watch.
Yeah.
He seems like a coward.
Totally.
And he seems like he's pandering to like reactionary fucking Republicans and conservatives and shit like that.
Yeah.
Or those types of audiences.
Or entirely lost his voice that he had before.
Yeah.
And just cannot reclaim it so far.
So I turned on this Aziz special like fully expecting for him to pull some shit like that. And to his credit, he does start the fucking special off by addressing the thing. And like... this is not a high bar for him to have passed, but I was like...
At least he didn't pretend it didn't happen,
yeah,
you mean?
yeah, at least he didn't fucking go around the country and pretend it didn't
totally.
happen.
Well,
you know?
Continue with like the things that contradict themselves.
Well, okay, so he really tells... I mean, honestly, like, it's weird. I am not a fan of Aziz's stand-up, but I think he somehow got better at it. Like in maybe just it's been an amount of time or he's been learning some shit.
Yeah.
There's some stuff he does in this special that I don't dislike. That I'm like,
I agree.
There are some well executed jokes, and the way he's telling the story.
Even the Hassan joke at the front was funny.
It's funny. It's a good way of fucking framing what happened to him and shit.
Yeah,
yeah. And so in this bit up front where he's like, I'm going to talk about what happened. I'm going to do this low voice thing and then the high voice thing, right? And then he makes the joke about like that wasn't me, that was Hassan.
Yeah.
Like. That sort of leads you to believe this is going to be an entire introspective work about, where you're at now. But he immediately goes, okay, we did it.
We're starting.
Now we're going to do what I just want to do. And then the jokes he goes into after that are often more reactionary bullshit.
Yeah,
They're more just like, oh, these fucking kids in the colleges are too political. White people, you know.
Yeah, but look, even before we go into like more of the actual material and like things said and whatnot, we have to talk about like the way that both of these things were presented, because they were presented in completely different ways. It's like weird that they put them together. I don't know. It really made me think like
I put them together.
Yeah, no, not the movie. I mean, Aziz's like first 6 minutes and then that rest of the special.
I follow you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when it starts from this one man camera following him into the arena or the theater or whatever, and like walking through the streets of the city, and we're getting like the intimate vibe, but it's not in this way of like the Chris Rock way where it's like I'm so cool, I'm on my way to my show. It's like in a very like, oh, I'm just a regular guy.
Yeah, like, it's to Lou Reed's Pale Blue Eyes.
Yes,
which is so weird of a choice if you just got Me Too'd.
The whole thing, and it's like slightly like with a soft focus filter, and then he gets to the theater, he sits on a stool. And then one of the first things that he does is immediately acknowledge or reference the cameraman standing in front of him with a camera like up close. And then, the big camera pans out and like shows the guy standing in front of him. And so he does that breaking the fourth wall or whatever thing of like, this is what we're going to do now, guys. Yes, we all see this camera guy here. And then they cut to the point of view of that camera right in front of him. So it's like a close-up angle. And what you see in the background is not curtains or a backdrop that's expensive and fancy and beautiful. You actually see the like backstage doorways with like silhouettes of people standing and attentively watching him talk in this way that is supposed to be, at least in my opinion, the way it fucking reads is watch what I'm about to say right now like you're my friend. Like you're watching the show from the side of the stage and hanging out with me because we're regular cool people who are the same. And he touches multiple times throughout the special on like the idea that it could happen to any of us we're all assholes deep down. And it's like, people are all flawed, but not everybody's out there fucking grabbing people and doing shit like that. Like, what are you talking about? So it is this like very disingenuous, and I don't know, like he could have genuine feelings of growth and remorse. He did talk about, I guess, thinking that he's like a better person. I don't know, but the way it's presented, it's like device after device to be just like, come on in, believe me. Like this is the opposite. Like if you think of Aziz's specials before this.
Oh yeah, they're all just Randy and shit.
But even the way they're presented, it's like opulence and like fancy clothing, and I'm friends with famous people, and I take limos to like full brag about how wonderful and fancy his life is. Not how accessible it is, not how he's just like you, not understand my point, you know? And so this was so strange to me to just suddenly, you know, everybody commented on the low voice, the low speaking thing, but to me, I was like, before he even spoke, dude, it was like set up as just like, I'm about to open up to you, and you should see me as just one of you guys.
The other funny thing is that, like, following an era of comedy where his thing was he decided he was going to be like the comedian who talks about modern romance and wears a fucking suit and shit and does this like classic shit, he immediately like can't be that guy anymore because he's been proven to not be an authority on romance, clearly. And then he also is wearing like a Metallica t-shirt, which is like a very put on, like, I'm just a normal guy, dude. You know? Nothing going on over here. No.
Totally. No. And you know, and personally, I think like he always had a problem with like his expression seeming genuine because it seemed like very rehearsed storytelling is what he did, you know? So a lot of times with storytellers, like they memorize the facial expression that should go with this particular part of the story, and you can kind of pick up that it's like it's not really genuinely the expression you're having right now unless you're really good at it, right?
Yeah.
And this now, like, to me, let's call it the apology part. It's not really an apology. Let's say the acknowledgement. The acknowledgement part at the beginning.
The Star Wars call at the beginning
exactly. Wait, what was I saying about that? I totally forgot. I started thinking about Star Wars. I'm the worst.
You're talking about when he's seeming genuine or rehearsed story.
So then during that vignette at the beginning, he like doesn't read super genuine to me, but not in this way of like, you don't believe, like, not you're trying to lie to us, let's say, not like disingenuous, but like, have you ever seen, well, I don't even know if you would have noticed this, but like comics, when they're very new, right, a lot of them tend to like lean heavy on jokes that are like addressing things that they think they have to address because it's what the audience is thinking about. So like it leads to a lot of like what I look like jokes, and this is my voice is like, and this is, and you know what I mean?
The Dan Ninen joke.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to Stand Up for Diversity auditions? Everyone does the Dan Ninen joke.
Yeah. Wait, what's the Dan
Ninen, you know who he is, right?
Yeah, but what's the joke that
his like famous joke is like, I'm half Japanese and half Indian, so I get my sushi at 7-Eleven.
Oh, okay.
But like literally, I don't know if this is still a
formula.
thing, but like every single person, I noticed this early on in stand-up because I had actually someone in the industry kind of point this out to me, and it blew my mind.
Yeah.
He was like, amateurs always go up and they talk about themselves.
Yeah.
And fucking, you watch like Stephen Wright come out and he doesn't go, I'm half Irish or whatever.
No,
he just starts telling
there's
jokes.
Just
right?
a joke, yeah.
And everyone, when they talk about themselves, tends to like, people aren't that interesting, so we all just have the same thoughts about shit. And like start with your ethnicity or whatever.
Totally. No, and I've mentioned this to like veteran comics that are like over 20 years, and a lot of them take the point of view of like it's a necessary part to like finding your voice is to like get through all of these jokes you think you have to do, right?
Sure.
And honestly, that doesn't mean there are no good jokes about what people look like or whatever. I'm talking about a particular formula. But the way that Aziz was like saying his acknowledgement part of the situation read like he is saying this because he thinks he has to, not because he wants to. You understand me? So like in this way of like when a comic comes up and it's just like, yeah, I know I'm tall. And then it's like, yeah, I could tell you have said that 600 times on stage and you think that's the way to start this set and you just want to get past that to your real jokes, but you don't know how to just get to your real jokes.
I have a friend who started doing stand-up who's tattooed his entire body to look like a lizard.
I know that guy. I mean, I've seen him around. Yeah.
He got tired of doing stand-up because he was unable to escape that. Every set had to be like,
yeah, of course,
I'm green, you know.
Totally, no, and
at least I think that's why he quit. I don't know.
But that's not true, because imagine if he like had an amazing 5 minutes of tight ass jokes and he never once mentioned the fact that he's
I've
fucking
told this
green.
Story a lot on the show, but my take on it was that when he first started, he had a lot of great jokes, like he would go, as a person of color, etc., stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
But I think he got bored of doing those jokes, and his true thing he wanted to talk about was politics. But it didn't work. My take on it, at least, is that it was always really weird when you would just be in the Velveeta room, and there would be like an organic audience in there.
Yeah.
And we all know him, and then this green human would just walk on stage and just go like, "Mitch McConnell, let me tell you something," and everyone in the audience would be like, are you going to explain what's going on with your face? Like,
no, I know, and you have a point, because I do think that's the situation Aziz is in, is like, I think he feels, or he felt at the time they decided to do this special this way, that he couldn't get up on stage and do a special without addressing this shit.
Well, that also happens when you're famous.
Right.
Yeah.
But Louis got up and didn't address it. You know what I mean? So
yeah, but people like when you
not
because
that,
he was
and
pandering.
also wait, not that it's the same things that they did. Blah blah blah.
Right.
Yeah.
But because like Louis was pandering to reactionary people,
Yeah.
so like it was addressed by him not addressing it. They were like, "Fuck
That's
yeah!"
true.
Like,
Yeah, you're right.
don't fucking cower to these cancel
Yeah.
culture people. You know,
Yeah, totally.
like
You
there
have a
was
point.
probably not a lot of people in the room that were just like, "Oh, Louis C.K. Yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't heard from him in a minute. I have no idea what happened." You know.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I don't know. Overall, I just thought it was weird and really like packaged that beginning part, and then it just, like you said, like suddenly like one joke cut, change of camera, and like full tonal change on the screen.
Yeah.
And now it's just stand up, except that it still kept the shots of like the backstage view. Like there was no real backdrop to the special, which is like completely antithetical to everything he's done. Which, you know, whatever, you can look at it as growth, I guess, but it was, to me, it just is, it seems more like an attempt to manipulate.
Yeah, well, I think the main thing, especially when it comes to like Me Too shit and like, you know, having like real discussions about that sort of thing, is that like you think about, especially like dudes, I think like Aziz and Louis, who they strike me as egomaniacs. I'm gonna call back to something I wrote on Facebook fucking years ago, and I'm gonna say I fucking called it. All right. A few years ago, I put a post up that was like, how many more autobiographical shows about comedians do we fucking need? How many of these single camera dramas about comedy do we need?
Yeah.
And a lot of people fucking fought with me, and they were like, what? I think it's, you know, it's interesting to hear about these people's lives.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, this is a trend. There's a bubble. It's going to burst at some point. Louis started this. Now everyone's doing it, and it's not that interesting anymore, but it is very attractive to the comedians. Everyone wants to fucking do that. And to me, it's a little bit navel-gazing and narcissistic. Mm-hmm. And to me, that seems symptomatic of people like Louis and Aziz when they get told, hey, you might not be able to do this anymore because there's a more serious problem we need to work out with you. That's the end of the world. And he phrased it as
literally
like,
said, I saw the edge of, what was it? And he was like, and it felt like I died.
He felt like I died.
The possibility of not being able to do stand up.
And then he goes, in a lot of ways I did die.
Yeah,
you know?
just so fucking
like,
dramatic.
No, you just, it's just comedy. It's just a thing that you get on stage. It's fun or whatever, but it's art, man. It's not like, you know, you don't have a fucking right to it.
Well, it's just like a weird, well, first I'm going to disagree with you a little bit in terms of like the navel gazing thing. I don't necessarily think that personal comedy is like bad or not possibly good. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of what people think of like a rush to book diversely is actually a rush to book different points of view.
Yeah, sure.
Because people want to book more relatable experiences. I would say partially because maybe this is what you're getting at, that is the kind of gross part about that, which is the fact that so many comedy audiences are looking to find themselves projected on stage, you know, like to find this person, like comics or comedy that reflects their point of view and worldview and whatever, as opposed to coming to art and being like, I'm here to see what the artist made. You know what I mean? And then like take it in and see what it is. There's something about comedy, and maybe it's that it's one person speaking directly to you or whatever, but I would say that the problem is not from the comics like ego point. And maybe this is like me loving comics too much and always wanting to see the best thing, but I would say it's from like, in general, I'm just going to say Americans because I'm not going to generalize about other cultures, but Americans have a real idolization problem, you know, like
oh hell yeah,
we do not know how to appreciate a person's work
we have
or
a real
words.
Madonna whore complex with celebrities.
Yeah, absolutely. and you know, like I remember like Che, he like would go on, Michael Che would go on these like rants about how, you know, once you're like famous, like people feel like they have the right to like your time and your attention and to touch you and to comment on things that you do and whatever. And, you know, it sounds like, oh my God, you're complaining about being famous. What a fucking baby. But it is true. It is true that like the way that most people like comedy is through idolizing particular comedians. It's why they're like, how do we get Louis back on stage, instead of being like, what the fuck does he have to say?
Well, I mean,
like,
we're doing that
cares?
on a small scale with this parasocial podcast shit, because like, we're selling our personalities to less people, but cutting out the middleman to where it's still like I still get paid enough to live off of it, but it's still the same relationship. And like something I've been thinking about with this podcast shit a lot is that like we are kind of living in like a weird dystopian future that kind of reminds me of something that you would read like about happening in Japan or some faraway place, that that could never happen to us. But like this podcast shit where we're like micro celebrities is, to me, it seems as though we've hit a point where art has dropped all pretenses of it being about a product that the person makes and then you like them for it, right? Because like, back in the day, fucking Prince made music, and then the music was like sonically pleasing. You're like, this is amazing. And you bought
an actual record.
And then you also bought a poster of Prince you put on your wall, and you loved Prince. And it wasn't just like a thing where it's just if you could hear it without the identity attached to it, it was as good. It was the identity was part of it. But we cut out most of the fucking art in the middle of that, and it's just this like idolization sort of worship thing. Because I mean, I don't think
you're wrong, but here's the thing. What I would argue with you is like, okay, at least how I see it, because I came to podcasts and to all this shit through stand-up, and I think that a lot of the people now are actually coming the other way. Like they find podcasts and then through podcasts get into the stand-up that the hosts do. I came the other way. I knew you all first as stand-ups, and because of that, I started listening to podcasts. And so to me, there has always been a very clear definition. The reason I've never listened to a Red Scare is because I don't give a shit about any person with a microphone who could just talk. And that doesn't mean that there aren't great people that could talk great out there.
Yeah.
But to me, there are comics who don't have good podcasts and are not good at it and can't build that niche audience, but they're great stand-ups. And there are comics who can build that niche audience and aren't that, and then like give up and stop doing stand-up. We don't have to name names. And technically like still consider themselves stand-ups, but in reality, 90% of their effort is going towards the building the podcast thing, right?
Yeah.
And then there are those who have to like, but to me, all of these people are comics first. And so it seems like the tack they should take is it's your responsibility to make time for your art. Like the podcasting thing to me is actually pretty similar to going to LA to like work writing for a TV show that's not like your TV show. You're just literally writing for another person, right?
Yeah.
And what happens a lot to these LA comics, or like comics who move to LA to be writers, is, now the shows are farther away. It's harder to get off of work to go do stand-up. You got to wake up early. So you literally have to put in way more effort to just get back up on stage than you did when you lived in New York or in New Orleans or whatever the fuck, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes, I guess they would say unconscious choice, but it's a fucking conscious choice. If you choose to stop pursuing writing stand-up, getting on stage, doing this thing separately from the thing that makes you money and builds you an audience, then you stop being a stand-up. You know what I mean? You continue to be that other thing, a funny podcast host, a great TV show writer, whatever the fuck, right? But they're not, I don't conflate the two things. And I think the problem is a lot of comedy fans do, and maybe a lot of industry do, because also there's just this like, because of capitalism, if you have a fan base and you can get shit, then let's give it a shot with this person,
Well, stand-up often feels like the thing that we all love to do that is completely unprofitable.
Yeah,
and it's completely like useless.
I think we've talked about this before, where I'm like, everybody needs a day job. If your day job is delivering pizzas or having a podcast or writing for somebody else's TV show or writing some e-cards, I don't give a shit. Those are your day jobs.
I never thought I'm going to go to New York or LA and make it big and be a professional comedian. My goal was to try to write for TV and then, get to do comedy, because I fucking already had seen how the way it works. What I've got going now is like even better. So I'm like, career-wise, very happy with where I got, because this is just Andrew Yang UBI, and then I get to do fucking
and have
comedy.
Your freedom on stage. Yeah, totally.
But that being said, I mean, I still have. It's hard to motivate myself to fucking do stand-up, because it's no longer this big question mark
it's
of
not
like
the only driver.
One day, is this going to turn into a job? It's like, no, this is now this weird thing that is like I'm treating like pure art and not a fucking thing. So it's like,
but isn't that kind of the ideal though?
Right. That's why it's such a fucking like Faustian Curse of the Monkey's Paw thing. Because you're like, I made it, and now it doesn't feel the way I did when I was a young, fresh-faced open micer who was like, maybe I'll be, a fucking big comic someday or whatever.
Yeah.
But you just develop a weird relationship with it where, like, you really have to ask yourself, do I actually like doing
want
this?
to do this,
or did I just want to get famous?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because that's why you just keep podcasting
Yep.
and stop doing stand-ups. You didn't like the fucking art. You just wanted
I think that question is so important that I recently dated a guy who used to be a stand-up and he quit. And then, like, when we went on our first date, I was like, oh, so, why'd you quit doing stand-up? And he just, like, looked me straight in the eye and was like, you know what, man? I, like, looked around one day and I realized I don't actually like doing this, and I don't know why I'm broke, like, just waiting around to do more of this thing I don't like to do. And I was like, that is so fucking hot. And I fucking dated him for a few weeks, and then he's still, like, the worst things about a comic, so it didn't work out. But he hooked me with just being so confidently over comedy. And I was like, that is just the sexiest thing I've ever heard.
I love people that quit comedy.
Yeah,
I have
man.
so many good friends that, like, because, like, you can't.
To me, it's way more courageous than fucking sticking around and doing the same set for 4 years and never growing and just whatever. What are you doing here then? I don't know. Just taking stage time.
Yeah, you're driving yourself crazy on purpose, and it's like your own fault, And when man, when I fucking talk to comics, like, there's always a group think, there's always like a bubble you're in or whatever. When I talk to my friends that quit, they hate everyone except for like 3 people.
Yeah.
And then you're like, yeah, you're right. Everyone does suck except for those 3 people, but I'm just forced to kind of work with everyone and shit.
Totally. Well, but wait. So we got to go back to Aziz for a second.
Okay, yeah.
The main reason we're here. Because I was thinking about the contradictions. Like, I had one...
The May Queen.
Yeah, and I had one main contradiction, or I should say, I guess, like 2 bits that really stuck out to me in terms of, like, they contradict each other, like you were pointing out some of these things do, but also they kind of, like, encapsulate separately, like, 2 of the sides or problems that are happening in comedy, weirdly. Like, early on the special, he had a whole bit that was, like, weirdly, this thing that, and he's not the only one to do it. I've seen it with other comics of a particular generation, but this thing where brown people, or let's say non-white, non-male, there are women out there doing this, I should say, who are kind of like embracing this weird apologist take on behalf of white people, right? And by which I mean, like, they are being contrarian to what they perceive to be like PC, whatever world, by putting the onus for, like, soothing disagreements and racial, like, inequity on the brown person or on the woman. You understand me? So he had, like, a whole bit that was... Shit, what was it? It was like he was saying...
You know what? I've done that.
What? You've taken on responsibility for being the one to, like, be understanding and hold the white guy's hand through understanding?
Sometimes when I do this story about ICE, I talk about cultural appropriation, the perspective of it, because I kind of change the way I tell it to, like, just to fit shit. Sometimes it's like, this isn't important, and you need to understand that, like, I'm not that offended about it, or, like, other people aren't. And, like, the joke is kind of like, it's okay. You're kind of calming fucking white folks. Like,
totally. No, but I don't even mean that, like, soothing them. But he does. So the bit, I'm gonna fuck it up because I fuck up all the bits. So everybody, I guess, watch Aziz's special. I don't know, but he does a bit early on that is about, like, I guess. It was like he does several fake outs throughout the thing where he, like, does, like, a thing and then he's like, I'm just kidding, I was making that up. One of them was where he says something about, like, something was done to a person of color and then the person of color, like, politely talked to the other person about why they disagreed and why they didn't like the thing that they said, right? And then he's like, just kidding, of course not. That's not what we do. We put it on Instagram and it goes viral and we all send hate threat messages, like, whatever. And basically, like, makes the argument that, let's say, bigots would hear us better if we approached them politely about their bigotry didn't just, like, quote unquote, try to cancel people and didn't, like, how. So basically saying it's shitty of a brown person to, let's say, tweet about mistreatment of some, like, corporation, some, like, employee at a place or something like that, when you could just politely speak to them about how the thing they do hurts your feelings, know, like, and consider that they might lose their job and that they might be offended too. And, like, how is it our responsibility to do that for you. You know what I mean? So that was the idea behind one whole bit. And then later on, he had another one that was, it was like, let's see, was it the pizza? No, the pizza swastika shit was. Oh my God! R. Kelly. So that was good. So then he had a bit again about R. Kelly, but what was funny because he had one in an earlier special, right?
Yeah.
But it was actually a really funny bit, I thought, because he was talking about, so it started with like the stupid dumb idea of like, oh, we're all terrible and we could all get Me Too'd because we all do bad things. And then he's like, but you, and I think he like names an audience member by name, and he's like, you, nobody knows what you were doing 10 years ago and like how you were supporting R. Kelly or not. But people know I was. Like, it's on tape that I was like, R. Kelly rules and I'm hanging out with R. Kelly. This guy's awesome.
Right.
And so he, I think, makes like an interesting point about how we are all having to consider the people that we associate with and whose back we have. And we have to think about how, like, just because this person is nice to me doesn't mean that they are treating everyone else with respect. And because they treat me with respect doesn't mean that they don't say toxic shit in their stand-up or in their podcasts or whatever. So I thought it was like he got so close to really addressing the fact that this like problem that men and especially white men seem to think is like only them being victimized by Me Too.
Right.
We're all fucking having to examine our friendships and our past relationships and like our past sexual encounters. And he got really close to making like a good point that completely contradicted this other one.
He did get really close, and it is frustrating to watch because, I mean, how else is he going to get there other than performing this shit and thinking it out, right?
But that's kind of a headliner problem, right? Don't you think? Like, they don't really get to work their shit out as much as they should before they make.
He said he'd been on tour, but then, what does that even mean? It's probably a bunch of shows where everyone's just fucking happy to see you, right? Mm-hmm. The thing about that stuck out to me is that, okay, so he's clearly comes from this perspective of having his world rattled by having been called out by call-out culture and shit, right? And so he's trying to ruminate on it, and he's trying to make some sense of it. And I mean, comedians always fucking whittle everything down to like, we got to look at every side of this, and and sometimes that's like good, and I think sometimes it's a cop-out or whatever. Yeah. But he's sort of saying, well, it could happen to you, right? It could happen to anyone, and I learned from it, and yada yada yada. He does a couple things, right, that I think are of note. The first thing is, like I said, he contradicts himself, right? Because he talks about your white friends and how they're so fucking woke, it's annoying and all this shit, right? Yeah. And they're just trying to get all this applause from each other. But then he compliments
them on being the wokest version of white people, or like the best version of white people so far.
And then he himself just does this one-off joke about how like marijuana is legalized, but all these black people are still in jail. Yes, and everyone claps, and it's like that wasn't a joke. That was just a fucking point, dude. You just did the thing you're talking about.
Totally. Not only that. So you remember the pizza swastika joke?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you didn't fucking watch the special, too bad. I'm about to ruin this.
Don't put it at the beginning.
It's fucking dumb. Yeah. Oh, okay, great. So this pizza bit is he basically just starts this bit by being like, did you guys read about this this person getting a pizza that had a swastika drawn on it, whatever, the pepperonis were in the shape of a swastika. And like some of the people, clap like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, I think the one that I read was on the Washington Post. And he points at one guy and he's like, oh, which one did you read? Did you read the one in the Washington Post? And the guy's like, oh yeah, I think that's the one that I read. He full says this. And then Aziz goes, see, I totally just made that whole thing up, and you see how you all go along with it, and people just like pretend.
You fools.
Yeah, exactly. And so
you were just talking about it, you got Me Too, and now you're back to you fools.
Yeah, but what was weird to me about that is like the point that he's trying to make is like, look at how call out culture and like PC culture, all this shit is bandwagons, right? It's like people jumping on with not enough information because they're trying to seem like they're woke and like they know what the fuck they're whatever, right? But what that bit actually demonstrated to me was, how are you not a clapter comic? Like,
right.
This, you just talked about how people would just go along with anything. So how do you not see when they are just applauding because they agree with you, or because this is the right thing to applaud, or because the people around them are applauding, or because they're drunk, or because, like there's no...
Yeah, you're the fucking orchestrator of the thing you're talking about.
Exactly.
The other thing is... you talk about these fake outs he does. I had a conversation with Adomian a while back where I was talking about this thing where I was like, it's funny that like everybody thinks that comedy is the same thing as truth, but also like everyone has a different opinion about everything. So how the fuck does that work?
Yeah.
And his take on it, and I don't quote him on this because we're drunk and it's the middle of the night, but I thought it was a good point. Is that he was like, no, comedy's about timing. It's not about truth. And like the argument that the truth is completely irrelevant to just how well you time the fucking thing, I think is something to be considered. And with what Aziz is doing in particular, Aziz literally, he could be talking about anything and then just do a 180 in the middle of a sentence and be like, the other thing. And that would be an Aziz
just, like,
joke.
laugh. And then it's just full on. But no, I agree. And it's what I would tell you is where I see truth mattering in comedy is actually the performer. Good performers, they have to be able to weigh their feedback honestly. Because, what I mean with like Aziz being a clapter comic is like, I feel like we all hear comics, let's call them free speech type comics and whatever, who like defend like jokes being if they're funny, right? What is it, funny over everything? So if it's funny, it doesn't matter what you're saying.
Can't take a joke.
But basically the idea being that if it's a good joke, if people laugh in the room, then that makes it okay to say, right? So they're saying that their feedback mechanism that makes a joke okay is the fact that the people in this room liked it, right? But then the honesty part comes in examining why the people in that room are laughing.
Well, that's the headliner problem, too, is because they're fucking paid to see you. They'll laugh at whatever you say.
Exactly. But then the real problem is that they stop, like, acknowledging that. And they're just like, yeah, people laughed. And it's like, yeah, but you didn't think about, are they laughing at you? Are they laughing at the butt of your joke? Are they laughing because they're excited to be in front of a famous person? Like, there's no... Yeah. So if you don't...
Are they laughing because it's the end of Midsommar and one of the cultists is pushing your butt so you fuck the woman harder? Because people laughed in the theater when that happened.
Laughed at that. I know. It's so stupid.
It's supposed to be scary, but it wasn't.
But it wasn't. It was like... But it was literally a childish, like, ooh, naked touching, like, laughter. And I was like, yeah, does that make that a good joke? I don't think it's a good joke,
I don't think it was intentional.
Yeah, so I think that's where the fucking truth in comedy has to be, is like if you accept that your feedback cycle is the thing that determines the way that you make your art, then you need to be able to identify good feedback versus bad feedback, or what feedback is actually saying, you know?
Or just what it means altogether, because like that is the same problem we have with these like micro-targeted podcasts and stuff like that, is that like, you are adopting the mechanism of celebrity in the way where your audience is not... There's two types of audiences you can have. One that is a fucking open mic audience. It could be literally anything, and that is where you can make the argument of like, this joke works every time in front of fucking anyone who ever, and then and then this niche like cultivated audience that you have, which is what you have as a headliner or what you have as like a podcast or whatever there. But then like that really kind of leaves you in question of like whether what you're saying is necessarily true, and there's like it's particularly relevant, or you've sort of like got stuck in this
loop. An echo chamber.
The other thing I wanted to talk about just real quick, I don't know, the last thing I have here, we're getting close to an hour, just let you know.
I got one thing too.
Okay.
Very short.
So my main takeaway on this is like when these types of guys get canceled and then they sort of try to skate and like brush it off though, as though that is not going to be like a scarlet letter on you forever, or like forever relevant to your situation, to try to just get back to like imagining that it all went away and I'm just still doing stand-up in the form of human, of like what I am or whatever. I think that these guys often find a lot of solace in reactionary culture, right? Reactionary being like the thread of right-wing thought that's entire point of view is not really based on anything except for reacting to cringy liberal shit and campus culture and stuff like that. So he starts talking about mobs a lot. He sort of alludes to this thing that is very common among comedians. A lot of comedians, because this like kind of cancel culture thing has been around for a long time, have defense mechanisms against it. Every comic you talk to that fucking works in clubs and is kind of famous or whatever tell you like, oh, I don't ever answer anyone on Twitter because fuck the mob and all this shit. And like it's this huge threatening thing, and it's cynically formed by people that are trying to take down you, this great comedian, at all times for their own personal gain, right? And the thing that's confusing about that is that it's kind of true, because
that's what I was gonna say.
fucking people do that to me all the time. All these
it's not happening.
all these fucking people. I think it's weird. It's like all these like compound media and like compound people think that I'm like an SJW, like cancel culture person. No, I have two very simple rules. You raped somebody, you probably shouldn't be around women in a show, and if you're a fascist, that sucks. Like it's a dumb, hacky thing to do. But I mean, I get fucking people telling me to take shit down all the time. I'm a fucking I like fucked up comedy, you know? I am one of those people. I'm kind of a troll. Etc.
Kind of.
But my point being is that so I'm reading this book right now. It's called So You've Been Publicly Shamed, right? It's by this guy John Ronson, and he talks to a bunch of people who have been canceled. It came out like maybe a few years ago, so it's like not even at peak cancel culture or whatever.
So
but
it's
like
just like publicly dragged or no publicly.
Sort of. I mean, one of the people he talks to is Justine Sacco, who's that woman who was on a plane.
She tweeted some racist shit or something, right?
Well, she tweeted she tweeted what he describes very empathetically as a bunch of acerbic jokes or acerbic or whatever. No. They're edgy jokes.
Are they?
I mean, her Twitter was just like. I mean, it was fucking. She could have a cumboy. You know, she could have been just some fucking person, and then she had like fucking 150 followers. Who gives a shit, right? But she tweeted in the middle of a flight to Africa. Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Just kidding, I'm white or whatever. And then she lands on the ground and fucking finds out the entire world's talking about her. And so he talks about this like, this mob theory. And he traces it back to there's a French anthropologist named Le Bon. I forgot his first name. But he's kind of obscure because he got canceled too. Because he came up with this idea called mob madness. And the idea was just being that like, when people get into these groups where they riot or when they form unions and revolt and stuff like that, no matter what, it's always just when people get together, they're crazy, right? And so he was also a eugenicist and did things like he would take like dead people's skulls and then like measure them, fill them with BBs or whatever, and like count how many. And he would go, see, the richer upper class people have bigger skulls, therefore they're smarter, yada yada. He sucked. Hitler loved him. Fucking Mussolini loved him. Girls loved him. Right? He sucked. And the reason I bring up him and his sort of subsequent, the people that came on his coattails, is that the theory of an angry mob is often, I'm not saying it's not real, but it's very politically advantageous to conservative right-wing people. Right. Anytime that they're being threatened, anytime the people at the top are being threatened by any sort of collective action, they often sort of frame it as like, oh, this is this fucking, mob. They're coming with their pitchforks and stuff like that. Totally. And I think that might be why all these fucking dudes kind of low-key find solace in like the Trump crowd after they get canceled, because that's the same ideology. Like they're kind of buying into, there's some kind of overlap there between. You know what I think it might be? If you go back historically even farther, before we were crowds of individuals, we were like crowds of peasants, right, who didn't like read and like that kind of thing. Like back in like true aristocracy time, let's say, right, in Europe. It's kind of, if you want to get into like the real sciencey part of it, it's mostly Foucault, but there's others that talk a lot about the way that the idea of a mob was used to control populations, right? So that I think before the idea of the mob coming for those in power or in spotlight, there was a mob that was manipulated by those in power and in the spotlight. And I think that the fear that those people have of the quote-unquote mob comes from this like rooted knowledge that if you can manipulate mobs into doing things like obeying you, and I think Foucault's main example is when we used to have like public executions and public punishings, and like the whole city and whatever town would come, bring their children, and they would watch a person get hung or get beheaded. And it was
actually, like he argues, it was a tool of the state in which you punish one body in the view of all of these bodies, and they all simultaneously learn the lesson that this could happen to you and that this person deserves ridicule and punishment, right?
Yeah.
And so
public canceling.
Yeah, exactly. But the canceling was directed from the elite. You understand me? And so that, with the like rise of individualism and like Twitter and more people having platforms and access and whatever, the mob that they created and they controlled for so long now turns on them.
Oh, yeah.
You understand me?
Totally.
And I think it's very similar. Like, I've never thought this before, so if I'm getting anything wrong, sorry, I totally just came up with this idea. But it does ring true to me in terms of like those comics, because I think subconsciously they know that if you have the power to manipulate an audience, to make them laugh, to make them uncomfortable, to bring them back to loving you, to make them hate you again, then you know that they can also work as a giant force against you, right? That if they all decide that they don't like you, then that's dangerous, and how do you win them over?
Yeah, that's the thing that's so funny about like when people get canceled by their own audience.
Dude, and when you think about the fact that like almost every comic I've ever known has talked about or admitted the fact that they could be doing really well, but there's one person in the front that's like arms crossed and they look like they hate you.
Yeah.
And that's the only person you could see. I think that's a version of that, of like they magnify a few bad comments into, or like some negative critique into like, I'm being attacked by a whole mob.
Right. That's what I'm getting at, is that the mob is somewhat imaginary for a lot of people, because it's not actually like, they're not actually
organizing and getting you, and like
no one's actually stopping you from doing anything.
Right,
All of these guys have comeback comedy specials.
Yeah.
Nobody's actually
Louis could continue to self-publish for the rest of his life.
No one's really being stopped from working, which is like this weird libertarian thing where they look at it and they go, should people be allowed to not work or whatever? And honestly, we can get into this, but I think that's why you need socialism. So if you cancel, you can just fucking live, whatever. All right.
Yeah.
But the other thing, sorry, this is my last thing from that book or whatever, but the other thing that he talks about is that subsequently, if you look after that, there's another there's a thing in the 70s that happened that, also is like a foundational text on what we would refer to now as like sort of mob culture gone mad, and that's the Stanford prison experiments, right?
Okay.
And the Stanford prison experiments, everybody knows, is like in the 70s, this guy got a bunch of fucking college students and he put them in a room and he said, for a week, you guys are the guards and you guys are the fucking prisoners, right?
We switch it up.
And then they went crazy, and the people who were the prisoners assumed the roles of the prisoners, and the people who were the guards assumed the roles of the guards, right?
Yeah.
And so everyone has created this like conventional wisdom based on what we're supposed to be inferring from that, which is that like people will go crazy with power if they're allowed to beat up on other people, right? But that shit's been debunked.
Yeah.
So every video from that experiment is all kind of the same guy, and it's this guy, and he's like, as he's getting meaner and meaner and turning more into a Nazi, he starts to develop more of a Southern accent, right?
Oh, weird.
Yeah, and so John Ronson tracked him down, and he interviewed him, and he was like, hey, you're like the guy that all of this stuff is attributed to. No one else in this experiment really like you're the peak like person who is supposed to be the example of, of people going mad with power and fucking forming, a mob and beating up on. Supposedly this is analogous to like, let's fucking kill someone in like town square, right? And the guy goes, yeah, I gave a really good performance, didn't I? And he goes,
weird.
What do you mean? And he goes, yeah, well, I mean, it was a long, boring study, and nothing was really working, and like no one was really doing anything. But I had just watched the movie Cool Hand Luke.
Oh my gosh!
And in Cool Hand Luke, there's like this prison guy who's like an asshole, right? And so he's just like, I was just doing Cool Hand Luke shit, and then that's why the Southern accent, because the guy's not from the South.
Okay.
Goes, oh my god! And then he's like, wow, okay, so this debunks the Stanford prison experiment.
Yeah.
Then he thinks about it a little while, and he goes, so why did you do it? And he goes, well, I mean, partially because I was bored, but also partially because I thought we were supposed to do that to make the experiment work. And so the conclusion being, he didn't go crazy with evil. He went crazy with good. He thought he was like he thought he was helping. Like he thought he was doing what you were supposed to do. So I guess the idea that's proposed in this book is like, the mob is not powered by evil. The mob is powered by like they think they're doing the right thing, and that's why it's like maybe even more dangerous sometimes. Well,
I mean, I would say a point that would prove that or agree with that. Let's say not prove it is the fact that like a lot of times, how often do we see comedians being like defending a joke on the basis of free speech, but they're using that against another person expressing their free speech.
Oh, yeah. It's every single fucking time.
Yeah. And so what I see a lot of times is that what you just pointed to of like the person who's criticizing, like let's say the troll or whatever, who's saying some shit to a comic about this joke they don't like, or the blogger who wrote a thing, I think it's a version of they're doing the right thing, or they think they're helping, because what they're doing is also being like, I'm exercising my free speech and I'm giving you feedback and, you know, I'm participating in society. And so
I'm taking down the big bad.
Yeah. And so it's, you know, it's strange. I don't know. I do think there's like a weird thing there that they have to figure out in understanding like I don't know. It's a weird thing. But for me, the last two things are not even two real things. They're just, I guess, throwaway comments about the Aziz thing. But one thing was, I just found the overall tone of it really strange in terms of like, it seemed like one of the main narratives in it was complaining about the moralizing of comedy, right? Like saying like jokes were just jokes, and like talking about like how now he has to worry about the old jokes that he did, and are people gonna like play this and cancel him again and things like that.
Yeah. And
like how, you know, it's weird, nobody should be moralizing comedy, but then a whole other narrative is him moralizing comedy the whole time.
Yeah.
And like you know, painting words and jokes as inherently good and then like moralizing things, and so just full of contradictions. But the main thing that I wanted to end it on in terms of feedback there is he did not end on a punchline.
I know.
What the fuck?
And earlier in the special, he's doing that low talking thing.
Yeah.
And as a joke, he goes, what if I just ended it right now like this?
Yeah.
That would be so weird, right?
Yeah.
And then he just fucking does that like 20 minutes
He
later.
fucking totally ends it as just like, and that is the conclusion to my special. And I was just like, what the fuck? Is this a TED Talk? What just happened right now?
It's
So,
Nanette, dude.
Yeah. And it's, yeah.
Or, I mean, you know, I think he also... It sounded to me like he was going for like that second Chappelle special where he's super artistic at the end.
Okay, I see.
And it just fucking cuts, which I loved, by the way.
Yeah, but that's not this. It didn't cut. It was
didn't
just
work.
No, like he.
I just meant that's what he was
yeah,
going for.
Yeah, maybe, but it just really seemed like just like, well, I finished saying everything I wanted to say.
But you have to have seen a million comedians that like got into the low talking thing, and they're like, I'm gonna fucking break it down, and like, you know, get so fucking weird and like guru-y about it.
It's the like.
I was on a show with a guy doing that like a while back. I'm not gonna say where. I'm not gonna say when. But he was like doing a spot, you know, and he did like that. And I was like, if you're a headliner, this works. But if someone has to go on after you and you're like bringing it down, that's fucking weird, dude.
Well, and it's just structurally, when, you know, we're supposed to think of specials as finished products, and it's just not, you know, and I honestly like hate it when anybody's like, this is how comedy's supposed to be. All I'm saying is it's fucking weird that you didn't end your goddamn special on a punchline. That's it. Thought it was stand-up.
You know how it should have ended? He gets sewn up inside of a bear, and then they bring in, with all the other canceled comedians. So
it didn't. So I have some idiot person who, like, I don't know, wanted to be nice to me and give me a gift and knew I like comedy years ago, gave me a record of Aziz's album. The one where, do you remember? So I have it. It's the only stand-up album that I have in my house.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's weird. I should throw it away. But it's funny because that album, the cover is like Aziz in a suit standing in front of like a stuffed bear.
Oh,
do you remember it?
No.
We'll look it up in a minute. So it's like old Aziz, you know, like fancy.
I told you these were connected.
Yeah, totally. And so the new album could totally be like him in a bear suit set on fire by a crowd that's trying to cancel him.
I'll make that the SoundCloud picture.
That would be funny.
Yeah. All right. Well, I feel like we got pretty deep into it.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess with all that said, that was a pretty good like rumination on these two weird things and culture that's happening right now. We should probably announce our fucking podcast, baby.
Yeah, so exciting. So I guess we could say after being on Pod Damn America a few times, which I've enjoyed a lot, Jake and I decided to start another podcast where we're just going to talk about shit like this.
Yep. We're going to fight the comedy industry from the inside.
Yeah, you know, maybe burn some bridges. So we're going to call it, it is called Why You Mad. We are going to launch it probably in August. Don't hold us so much to that. We're working on it.
This is like a coming soon.
Yeah, but, you know, you can follow us on Twitter already at Why You Mad Pod. spelled everything out correctly. YU Mad Pod. And we'll post the free episodes and all that stuff then. But it should be fun. We are gonna try not to make it too angry. But I think it'll be a good mix because, we both have a healthy amount of bridge burning in us, but also I think I could be the anti-troll to your troll. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll learn plenty about each other.
Yeah, should be fun. Hope you guys will tune in.
Yeah, well, if people really enjoy you on this show, I got a lot of emails about you, so hopefully we'll have some listeners to start off with.
That's great. I love it when you guys say nice things, only nice things. If you want, you can follow me at Luisa Diez Nuts on Twitter.
Diez y Flores.
Oh, yeah, I know.
10 flowers.
I know. We should have gone with like a real punny name, but let's just get to the point.
Well, I like Why You Mad.
Yeah, me too. Me too, because, you guys will see. I think it'll be fun. We're going to talk not just about inside comedy stuff, but just like generally stuff people are mad about online, whether it's us or you or others.
You know why I like that title? Is because, like, you can be really mad, and then that sentence immediately
makes you so mad.
Like, shut up. You know? It's just like,
what? I'm not mad. Yeah.
Deflates the whole thing.
Yeah.
I every once in a while, if somebody's, like, going off on me on Twitter, I'll just type thank you for this at them. And I got that from Justin Flanagan because he used to do that to me on fucking Facebook all the time. Whereas like I would be like really seriously writing like fucking paragraphs about some shit, and he would just go thank you for this. And like the sarcastic like sound of his, like you can hear his voice, it just fucking always made me realize how dumb I was being. And like I think that's a good place to start with the internet because people tend to hold on to these fucking, angsts and grudges and stuff.
Or like read stuff as more angry than you really mean it. If, especially when it's like those of us who know each other and then we like tweet about things and subtweet and all this shit that gets read certain ways. So hopefully it won't be like a gossip podcast. But, I think we're both pretty frank and honest and don't hold back. So it should be fun.
Yeah. All right. Why You Mad? Coming soon. Check that shit out. Oh, also, I gotta plug my own shit.
Oh, yeah.
You know who I am, but fucking the 31st. I got the date wrong when I originally recorded this. 31st. At Secret Loft in Manhattan, me and Alex Patak are gonna roast the shit out of the Democrat debates. I'll put the link to tickets in the info and everything, and I'll tweet it out and everything. But if you live in New York, come fucking hang out. Tickets are already on sale. So come watch the debates with us. It'll be fun. We'll get drunk. We'll make dumb jokes about Marianne. All that shit, Woo. All right, bye.
Bye.